Welcome to part 5 of the 5 more epic battles of Chinese history. But for today's stunning and saddening finale, I present modern global politics and modern urban warfare. I present the actual first shots of World War II. I present Songhu Huizhan, the Battle of Sōnghù, better known to the Western world as the Battle of Shanghai. Yeah, that Shanghai. Fights on. Before we start, because this isn't some distant ancient battle, but a relatively recent event that remains a sensitive topic to many people, I want to note that this will be an abridged, hopefully objective account meant only to introduce this slice of history to those of us who aren't familiar with it. I will just provide a simple and straightforward retelling of what happened, so you can better seek out further documentaries and discussions if you so desire. Let's go. Years before Europe became embroiled in World War II, East Asia was already in chaos. Imperial Japan had taken over northern China. The communists and the nationalists were busy fighting for power over the rest of China. But the strained relationship between China and Japan was a powder keg waiting to blow. And a series of unfortunate events would light the spark that would explode into an all-out war called the Second Sino-Japanese War, or for some, the true beginning of World War II. It was August 1937. Japan had had troops stationed around the bustling city of Shanghai for 5 years now with an eye on taking it over. And the wary Chinese kept their fingers on the metaphorical trigger. The US, the UK, France, and Italy brought both sides to the negotiation table to try to keep the situation civil and prevent further destruction and disturbances to foreign trade. But things were too far gone. The Japanese would not relent, and the Chinese would not give in. The foreign powers could do nothing but go home and hope that nobody shot first. But the troops from both sides had already congregated in and around the city, and they were all armed and angry. Nobody knows how and where exactly the fighting started, but when tensions are high, the smallest wrong move will snowball into disastrous consequences. First, small pockets of gunfire popped up around the city. That turned into some mortar fire from the Chinese. Then, a few artillery rounds from Japanese warships. But on the 14th, that escalated into Chinese bombing runs and ground assaults on Japanese forces. And China officially declared that they would defend themselves and resist Japanese occupation. And so, the Battle of Shanghai began. Some said it was as if the Battle of Gettysburg, the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War, was taking place in New York City's densely packed 4-square-mile neighborhood of Harlem. How so? Well, between the two parties, there would be a total of 1 million soldiers fighting tooth and nail in the streets and skies of Shanghai. It would be the first and one of the biggest urban battles in all of history. The Chinese had a total of 700,000 troops, while the Japanese only had 300,000. However, Japan still expected the whole thing to be over quickly because they had 3 times the tanks, 3 times the aircraft, and 100+ ships. And not only did they have more equipment, everything they had was much more advanced. But were it so easy? You see, China had already been having quite an unfortunate time for the past few decades. Imperial China was overthrown in 1911, and the subsequent Republic of China, also known as the ROC or the Nationalists, was constantly dealing with all kinds of problems ranging from internal corruption and military uprisings from its own ranks, to external occupation by the Soviets and the Japanese, while simultaneously vying for power against the rising Chinese Communist Party. At this point, the ROC was led both politically and militarily by a guy called Jiang Jieshi, or more commonly known by the Cantonese romanization of his name, Kai-shek. And he knew that with Japan at his doorstep once more, China needed to get help. And so, he threw everything that he and the Nationalists had at defending Shanghai, in the hopes that when the Western world saw that China's valiant defense amidst a city in flames that was once called the Paris of the East, they might just come to his aid, or at least tell Japan to back off. The Chinese, through sheer tenacity, ingenuity, and manpower, fought back against the very technologically superior Japan with literally everything they had. They used guerrilla warfare in the streets, took the rubble of bombed-out buildings to build defenses, ran suicide runs against bunkers, sent suicide bombers against tanks, and even repurposed guns from sunken ships to use as artillery on land. Literally every desperate measure. By the end of the month, fighting had expanded well beyond city limits along the rest of the coastline, from the streets to the skies, from the shores to the trenches. But as we are all well aware, over the course of history, technology has only gotten exponentially more destructive, and China's numerical advantage just couldn't keep up with Japanese firepower. But even in these dire straits, suffering innumerable losses, Kai-shek held on. What Japan thought would be a swift battle had now already lasted 3 months. It was now November 1937, and the Western powers were meeting in Belgium about the situation. They saw the chaos, they saw the desperation. Even if they couldn't stop the war, if he held on just a little longer, maybe they would at least send some help. But help never came. By November 26th, all surviving Chinese troops retreated from Shanghai, and 270,000 of China's best were dead. Japan, on the other hand, only lost about 20,000 men. All Kai-shek could do was to keep moving and keep resisting, despite continuous catastrophic losses, until 1945, when all Japanese military actions ended with the conclusion of World War II. And on that somber note, this concludes our second series of 5 epic battles of Chinese history. In retrospect, though, perhaps this isn't really 5 more epic battles, but 5 of the most incredible battles of Chinese history. From vast battlefields of millions of men to close quarters combat of 1 million men in cramped city streets, from horses and crossbows to machine guns and fighter planes, the ways of war are ever evolving. But, as Albert Einstein said, peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved through understanding. Empathy is the only true answer to human conflict. And with that in mind, good night, good luck, and I hope we can all have more empathy for each other. Thanks for tuning into this series, and until next time, 再见! If you enjoy the deeper meaning behind Chinese culture, folklore, legends, and strange true stories, then come explore more with me on Jared Tells Tales, where mystery, meaning, and the otherworldly still live on. Click the link to watch your first tale.